Today I'm making sourdough jalapeno cheddar bread. Our list of ingredients are as follows: active starter, flour, water, salt, cheddar cheese, and jalapenos. First things first, you're going to want to make sure that your starter is active and ready, and you are going to measure out 100 grams of active starter. Now the recipe I'm giving you is for 1 loaf of bread, but notice that I made a double recipe here. So to that, you are going to get 330 grams of warm water. I like to use a whisk to kind of help dissolve the starter in the water, and once you have that completely dissolved, it is time to add it to your flour. Now for this recipe, I used 500 grams of bread flour, but all-purpose flour would work just as well. Whenever I'm making sourdough, I always just use a butter knife to mix my flour together, and at some point here I realized it was kind of getting thick, so I did put my hands in there, but overall I try not to use my hands when doing this first step. I just kind of keep tossing it around and breaking the dough apart to get to the wet part. And all you're really trying to do here is get all of the flour wet, and then you're going to let it autolyse by covering it and letting it sit for an hour so that it can become completely hydrated. All right, so I'm just scraping down the sides of the bowl, getting any of the flour that's there at all, and then I'm going to cover this and let that autolyse for 1 hour. During that 1 hour, I am going to start chopping up my cheddar cheese. So you need 4 ounces of cheddar cheese per loaf and 1/3 cup of jalapenos. So like I said, I doubled this recipe, but I usually just make 1 loaf at a time. I've seen a lot of cheese bread recipes that use shredded cheese. I'm just not a huge fan of the stuff that they put on the outside of the shredded cheese, so I like to just dice it up into little cubes. Plus, you get a bigger piece of cheese inside your bread, which makes a really nice final product. So it's up to you. I just put this into a small dice, and then at the end here, I'm going to break the diced pieces into their individual cubes. The great part about this recipe is you can use any type of cheese. It does not have to be cheddar. That's just what I happen to use. Be as creative as you can with this. And if you don't like jalapenos, just make a cheddar bread. That would be fantastic. Now it's time to measure out and chop up those jalapenos. I just use the jarred jalapenos, but fresh jalapenos work as well. I do those in the summertime. Sometimes I even add a tablespoon or 2 of the juice from the jalapeno jar right into the mixture. After your dough has been autolysing for an hour, it is time to remove the lid and add 10 grams of salt that you have mixed with 30 grams of warm water. Mix it as best as you can to get it dissolved as much as possible, and then you're going to slowly pour that over top of your dough mixture and work it into the dough. So you're going to be kind of grabbing and pulling and squeezing to get it all dispersed throughout the entire amount of dough. This will take just a few seconds to get it kind of all worked through. You want to make sure that it is thoroughly embedded into your dough, and then it will be time to cover it up, and you will let the dough sit once again for a half an hour. Get a bowl of water to wet your hands so that the dough doesn't stick to them, and you're going to do your first set of stretch and folds. Then you will wait 30 minutes before you do the second set. And at that point, we'll start adding the jalapenos and the cheddar. When you're working with sourdough, anytime you feel that the dough is starting to stick to your hands, you just dip your fingers into a bowl of water, get them damp. Sometimes I even use a misting spray bottle and just spray my hands with a little bit of water. You don't want to add too much water to your dough. It's really just to keep your hands from sticking. Now we're going to start second set of stretch and folds, and during this stretch and fold we're going to slowly add in the jalapenos and the cheddar. So you notice I'm just adding a little bit of the jalapenos at this point in time, I'm going to add a little bit of the cheddar, and I'm going to start the folding process that is just stretching out to the side and folding over, trying to get all of the things that I'm adding in incorporated into the dough. This is by far the hardest part of the whole thing. Patience is what you need here. It's going to feel like it's not all going to come together, but it will at some point in time. And any of the little pieces that aren't seeming to want to go into the dough, I just use my finger and poke it way down into the dough, and it works out perfectly. After you get the first little section of peppers and cheese embedded into your dough, it's time to add a little bit more, and you keep doing that until you are completely done adding them to your dough. Now, I am not a professional baker. It's not like I know a whole lot about sourdough. This is just one of the recipes that I have tried numerous times, and I really enjoy it. If while you are mixing in the cheddar and peppers and doing these stretch and folds, the dough becomes tough or hard to pull any longer, just put the lid on, give it a 10-minute rest, and come back and finish mixing these in. Once they are all mixed in, you are going to put the lid on and let it sit for another 30 minutes. Once that 30 minutes has gone by, I am turning out my dough and I'm dividing it into two because I made a double batch. If you don't make a double batch, you don't need to do this part, but you can see that I'm just simply dividing it, and what you don't see here is I actually measure my dough so that it is exactly the same in each one of these containers. I'm gonna put the cover on, and at this point, my dough is going to sit out on the counter or maybe in the oven with the light turned on just to get it a little bit of warmth if it's a cold day, for 4 to 5 hours or until it has increased by about 50%. And at that point, I am going to pre-shape my dough, and after I have pre-shaped my dough and let it sit for 15 minutes, I'm going to do a final shape and get it into my bread pans. Now, my bread pans was what I'm using just to shape the dough. I will be taking it out of the bread pans. So I did put in parchment paper because I will not be baking it in the bread pans. Notice as I am shaping my dough that I am putting in any of the pieces that fall out and just kind of tucking them into the dough. They will bake perfectly fine. After 15 minutes of the pre-shape, it is time to do the final shape and get them into those pans and in the refrigerator overnight for the cold ferment. During the time in the refrigerator, your dough will continue to rise slowly, and it will slightly change its texture and taste, making it a much more desirable sourdough bread. I just wrap my bread with a tea towel and then put it in a plastic bag and stick it in the refrigerator overnight. And this is what it looked like in the morning when I had it uncovered. I take it out and I'm going to score it. And then I'm heating up my oven to 450 degrees along with my Dutch oven. And then it will get baked in the oven for 25 minutes with the lid on, and then 20 minutes with the lid off if you like a dark crust. My family prefers it to be a little bit softer, so I actually just left the lid on the entire time. I checked on it halfway through just to see how it was doing. Another thing I always do at the end of baking is I take the temperature of my loaves of bread. Sourdough should be anywhere from 205 to 210 degrees to be completely done. I have made bread quite a few times, and at the beginning I didn't check it. I did just kind of the tapping on the bottom for the hollow sound, and that might work for other people, but for me, I ended up with one loaf that wasn't baked through, bought a thermometer, and now I take the temperature every single time. So here's what my loaves look like as they come out of the oven. The parts where the cheese kind of gets a little crusty and brown on the outside is so delicious. And look at those little pockets of cheese. That is the difference between using pre-shredded cheese and dicing it up yourself. So I hope that you will give this a try. I am just trying to make a journey of doing a little bit healthier cooking for myself, making sourdoughs, making whole grains, and less processed food. So thank you for joining me here at White Shadow Fare.